The ship was called Permanent Wound, not a name chosen for comfort, a name chosen by a civilization that had spent 100 years sharpening itself into a single blade, aimed at one small blue world spinning in the dark. Commander Vreth Sokol stood at the viewport of the main hangar and looked out at his army. 200,000 Daika soldiers filled the space below him, their exoskeletal bodies clicking and shifting like a living floor of black armor. 4 arms each, eyes that saw in spectrums humans hadn't named, teeth that could crack stone. They were beautiful in their way. Vreth had been born for this, not in the soft way that politicians meant when they said such things. His egg had been selected from a military clutch, fertilized with command-grade genetic material, incubated at precise temperatures designed to maximize aggression and spatial reasoning. His mother's name was on a wall somewhere. He had never asked which wall. He was 140 years old. He had spent every single one of those years preparing for today. Behind him, the holographic display showed Earth rotating in the dark, blue and white and green. It looked like something you could hold in your palm and crush. Commander. The voice belonged to Archivist Yiel, and it carried the particular tone of someone who had been awake for 3 days and considered sleep a form of moral weakness. The final briefing is ready. Yiel was small for a Darka. 2 of her 4 arms were permanently ink-stained from a lifetime of writing, cataloging, and obsessing over a species she had never met. She was the architect of the invasion doctrine. Every tactical decision, every troop deployment, every assumption about human behavior, all of it traced back to Yiel and her team of analysts, who had spent a century picking apart intercepted human signals like surgeons dissecting a corpse. She was the smartest person Vreth had ever known. She was also, in a way that neither of them would live long enough to fully understand, catastrophically wrong about almost everything. But not yet. Right now, she was confident. Right now, the doctrine was still perfect. "Show me," Vreth said. The holographic display shifted. Earth disappeared. In its place, a cascade of data, images, and intercepted transmissions filled the air between them. "We have been collecting their signals since what they call the 1920s, Yiel began. She gestured with her 2 clean arms. The stained ones stayed folded behind her back, a habit she'd never broken. "Radio, television, early digital networks. We have cataloged over 9 billion hours of their media. We know their languages. We know their history. We know their conflicts, their religions, their fears." She paused. The display showed a human running. Slow, painfully, almost comically slow. "They are fragile," Yiel said. "Their bones break from impacts that would not scratch our juveniles. Their skin tears. They bleed easily and often. They require constant temperature regulation, hydration, and caloric intake, or they begin to die within days." Another image. A human war. Soldiers with rifles. Smoke. Mud. Their weapons are chemical-based. They ignite a powder inside a metal tube, which propels a small piece of metal at their target. It is clever, in a primitive way. We have tested our standard armor against their most common projectile types. The result was not even a scratch. Vreth nodded. He had seen the tests himself. A Darka chest plate mounted on a stand, while human weapons fired at it from every angle. The plate had not even needed polishing afterward. "Their greatest weakness," Yiel continued, and here her voice took on the tone of someone delivering the final line of a prayer, "is that they are divided. They fight each other constantly. They organize into competing nations, competing religions, competing ideologies. They cannot agree on how to feed their own young. A species this fractured will not mount a coordinated resistance. Our models predict full capitulation within 1 planetary rotation. 1 day. That was the promise. Land, strike, conquer, hold. A single day to swallow a world." Vreth looked at the data. He had looked at it 1,000 times. Every time, it told him the same thing. Earth was soft. Earth was slow. Earth was divided and weak and ripe. What of their nuclear capability? He asked. The only question that had ever given him pause. Yale waved a stained hand. Significant but self-deterring. They have enough nuclear weapons to destroy their own planet several times over. But they have built elaborate systems specifically to prevent their use. Their leaders are terrified of these weapons. They will not deploy them against a ground invasion. The risk to their own population is too great. This, at least, was true. It was also the last true thing in the briefing. And their space capability? Laughable. Yale pulled up images of human spacecraft, tin cans strapped to controlled explosions. They have reached their own moon exactly 6 times, and then stopped going. They have no orbital defense systems, no fleet, no capacity for void warfare. They are, by any metric in the Galactic Index, a pre-contact civilization still playing with fire. Vreth studied the images. A human in a white suit, standing on gray dust. The image was old, grainy. The human looked small and alone, and impossibly brave in a way that Vreth noted, and then dismissed, because it did not fit into any tactical column. That was the shape of the error. Not a lie, not incompetence, just a failure to account for the things that don't fit in columns. One more item, Yale said. She pulled up a final data set. Their emotional architecture. Humans form intense attachments to individual members of their species. Mates, offspring, companions. They grieve individual deaths. They build monuments to single people. They have medical professionals whose sole purpose is to talk to other humans about their feelings. She said this the way a surgeon might describe a species that had never developed an immune system. With pity, with faint disbelief. They are psychologically fragile, she concluded. Easily destabilized. A show of overwhelming force will collapse their will to resist. Vreth believed her. He had no reason not to. A century of data. 9 billion hours of evidence. 200,000 soldiers bred and trained for this single purpose. He turned to the viewport. Earth hung in the black, still and small and blue. It looked like the softest world in the galaxy. Vreth gave the order. The drop pods began to fall. The pod hit the wheat field like a fist from God. Vreth's teeth cracked together. His harness dug into the joints of his exoskeleton. The impact gel absorbed most of the force, but his bones still rang like struck metal. Around him, 12 other pods slammed into the Kansas dirt in a rough circle, each one throwing up a geyser of brown earth and golden wheat stalks. He popped the hatch. Air rushed in. It was wrong. Too rich, too wet, too much oxygen flooding his spiracles, making his head swim and his vision sharpen to a point that felt almost aggressive. The sky was enormous, blue in a way that his planet's sky had never been. And the sun, a single, yellow, medium-sized star, sat in that blue like a burning coin, heating his chitin until it clicked and expanded. He stepped out into the wheat. Nothing happened. Vreth stood in the field with his plasma rifle raised and his forearms locked in combat position, and his ceremonial armor gleaming under an alien sun, and the only thing that greeted him was wind. Wind and wheat, and a silence so total it felt like the planet was holding its breath. The doctrine had predicted panic. Mass civilian populations fleeing in chaos, screaming, disorder, the beautiful, useful terror of a species realizing it was no longer at the top. Instead, a barn, a fence, a gravel road leading to nowhere in particular, and a dog. It was sitting about 30 meters away, at the edge of the field where the wheat met a dirt path, brown and white. It looked at the 12 Darka soldiers, who had just fallen from the sky in burning metal pods, and it barked twice. Then it turned around and trotted away. "What was that?" Lieutenant Kale asked. His voice was steady, but his lower arms were twitching, which meant he was nervous and trying to hide it. "Fauna," Vreth said. "Irrelevant." It was not irrelevant. Something about the dog's complete lack of interest sat in Vreth's gut like a stone. A prey animal should run from predators. That was universal. Every planet, every ecosystem. Prey runs from things that are bigger and louder and fall from the sky on fire. The dog had not run. The dog had looked at them the way a homeowner looks at a delivery that arrived on the wrong day. Vreth pushed the thought down and activated his communication link. "Archivist Yiel, Ground Team 7 is deployed. No civilian contact, no resistance. The area appears to be agricultural. Requesting updated population density scans." Static. Then Yiel's voice tighter than usual. "Commander, we are having difficulty locating population centers. The infrastructure does not match our models. Their communication towers are present but appear to be unused. We are detecting signal traffic on frequencies and protocols we have not previously cataloged." "Explain." "I cannot, yet." That word, yet, was doing a lot of heavy lifting. Vreth let it go. He had a beachhead to establish. They moved through the wheat field in formation. 12 soldiers, 4 arms each, plasma rifles charged, exoskeletal armor that had been tested against every known weapon type in 3 galaxies. They moved like the tip of a spear that had been sharpened for 100 years. They reached the farmhouse in 4 minutes. It was white, wooden. A porch wrapped around the front with a rocking chair and a small table holding a glass of something brown. The door was open. Somewhere inside, a machine was making noise. Music, Vreth realized. Human music. A man with a deep voice singing about a woman who had left him. The farmer came out before they reached the porch steps. He was old, 70, maybe more, by human years. Skin like cracked leather. A hat that had seen more weather than most Darka ships. He was holding a weapon. A long metal tube with a wooden stock. A rifle. The kind Yiel had shown in her briefing. Primitive. Chemical propellant. Not a threat. The old man looked at 12 alien soldiers standing in his yard. He did not scream. He did not run. He did not fall to his knees, or beg, or freeze. He spat something brown onto the dirt, shifted his weight like a man settling into a stance he'd held 10,000 times, and said words that the Darka translation software processed and delivered to Vreth's auditory implant as, "Well, that ain't right." Then he fired. The sound was louder than Vreth expected, a sharp, angry crack that echoed off the barn and scattered birds from a tree Vreth hadn't noticed. The bullet, a small piece of metal, just as Yiel had described, crossed the 30 meters between the farmer and Lieutenant Kale in a time too short to measure. It hit Kale in the thorax. It went through. Not into, not against, through. In the front, out the back, carrying pieces of Kale with it. The lieutenant made a sound like air escaping a cracked vessel and dropped into the wheat. Vreth stared. His training held his body in place, but his mind was running calculations that kept returning errors. The armor was rated, tested, proven. The farmer worked the lever on his rifle. The spent casing tumbled through the air, catching sunlight, and he fired again. Another soldier dropped. Then again, a third. 3 dead in 4 seconds, from a single human, an old one. With a weapon that predated the invasion doctrine itself. Vreth raised his plasma rifle and fired. The bolt hit the farmer in the chest, and he was gone. Not slowly, not dramatically, just there and then not. The porch railing behind him scorched black, and the glass of brown liquid cracked from the heat. Silence again. The music from inside the house kept playing. The deep-voiced man was still singing about the woman. Vreth looked at Kale's body. The armor had a hole in it the size of a Darka thumb. The edges were clean. Whatever the farmer had fired, It was not the soft, round, slow projectile from Yale's briefing. It was something harder, faster, designed with the kind of attention that a species gives to a tool it considers essential. He activated his comlink. Archivist Yale. Commander. Your projectile analysis is wrong. A pause. Long enough to mean something. Explain, Yale said. 3 dead. Standard armor. Full penetration. The weapon was operated by a single elderly civilian. The pause this time was longer. When Yale spoke again, the tightness in her voice had spread to something wider. Something that sounded like the first crack in a dam that had held for a century. That is, not consistent with our models. No, Vreth said. He looked at the farmhouse, the porch, the rocking chair still moving from the old man's last living motion. The glass, cracked but still standing. The dog had come back. It sat at the edge of the yard, watching them, still not afraid. It is not. From orbit, Yale began pulling data streams she had never thought to look for. Frequencies she had dismissed. Protocols she had filed under noise. She found the first thread and pulled it, and what unraveled was not a correction to the doctrine. It was the end of it. But Vreth didn't know that yet. He was still standing in a dead man's yard, staring at a hole in armor that was supposed to be invincible. While somewhere in the distance, faint, almost imagined, he heard a sound he had no reference for. Engines, many of them, moving fast, getting closer. The wheat bent in a direction that had nothing to do with the wind. Sergeant D. Carvalho was not having a good day. She had been 14 miles from the landing zone when the call came in, sitting in the passenger seat of a Humvee that smelled like old coffee and Sergeant Billings' terrible cologne, reviewing a training schedule that no longer mattered. The radio had barked to life with a voice that was trying very hard to sound calm, and failing. Anomalous incursion event, grid reference followed. All units respond. Dee had closed her eyes for exactly 2 seconds, not in fear, not in shock, in the specific full-body irritation of a woman who had promised her daughter she would be at the soccer game by 4. She picked up her phone and texted her wife. Alien thing. Might be late. DVR it? Then she loaded her rifle, told Billings to drive faster, and started reading the laminated response card that someone in the Pentagon had written in 2019, and that she had always assumed was a joke. It was not a joke anymore. They reached the perimeter in 11 minutes. By then, the sky had already changed. The Darka had landed in waves across a 40-mile stretch of central Kansas. Thousands of pods, black and angular, half buried in dirt and wheat and the wreckage of a grain silo that had been in the wrong place. Alien soldiers moved in formations between the craters, tall, four-armed, armored in something dark that caught the light like wet stone. Dee watched them through binoculars from behind a low ridge. Billings was breathing too loud next to her. "They're big," he said. "Yep. They have 4 arms." "I can count, Billings." "What do we do?" Dee lowered the binoculars. She had 19 soldiers, 3 Humvees, 2 mounted 50 caliber machine guns, and a radio connection to people who had bigger things than 50 caliber machine guns. She had no air support yet. She had no armor yet. She had a laminated card that said establish perimeter and deny freedom of movement and maintain fire discipline. "We do our jobs," she said. "Set up the 50s on the ridge. Interlocking fields of fire. Nobody shoots until I say." It took her unit 4 minutes to set up. Professional. Quiet. No speeches. No drama. 19 people who had signed up to do a thing and were now doing it, same as they would have done if the thing was a flood or a wildfire or an enemy they recognized. The Darka column moved toward them without caution. Why would they be cautious? Their doctrine said humans were slow, weak, divided, and armed with toys. Dee let them get close, 400 meters. She could see their faces now, if you could call them faces. Hard plates of chitin with eyes set deep underneath, glowing faintly in a color she didn't have a name for. 200 meters. Light them up, D said. The 250 caliber machine guns opened up simultaneously, and the world tore itself in half. The sound was a physical thing, a rolling, continuous thunder that D felt in her jaw and her chest and the fillings in her teeth. The 50 cal fired rounds the size of a human thumb at nearly 3,000 feet per second, and each round hit the Darka line like a hammer hitting glass. Armor cracked. Bodies came apart. The Darka formation, tight, disciplined, 100 years of training evident in every step, dissolved in 3 seconds. Soldiers who had been marching in perfect order were crawling, falling, trying to raise weapons they couldn't aim because their arms were no longer attached. The Darka fired back, bright blue-white, searing the air, turning the grass where they hit into black circles of ash. One bolt hit a Humvee, and the metal peeled back like foil. Billings screamed. Someone else screamed. Dee didn't scream. She was too busy calling in the grid coordinates to people who had been waiting for exactly this call. Zulu 7, this is Foxtrot 9. Confirmed hostile contact. Grid reference follows. Requesting immediate air support. They die to kinetic. Repeat, kinetic kills them. Their armor is not rated for ballistic. Send everything. Copy Foxtrot 9. Asset inbound. 2 minutes. 2 minutes. D had fought in places where 2 minutes meant eternity. Here, it meant the same. She lost 2 soldiers in those 2 minutes. Plasma burns. The wounds didn't bleed the way bullet wounds bled. They cauterized instantly, leaving edges of cooked flesh that smelled like nothing D wanted to remember. She kept firing. Her soldiers kept firing. The Darka kept dying. Then the sky screamed. The A-10 Warthog came in low and slow for a jet, which still meant faster than anything the Darka had ever seen on a planet's surface. It was ugly. Built like a flying brick with a cannon strapped to its face. The cannon was a GAU-8 Avenger, and it fired depleted uranium rounds at a rate that turned the air itself into a weapon. The sound it made was not a sound. It was the fabric of the atmosphere being ripped along a seam. A buzzing, tearing roar that arrived after the bullets, because the bullets were moving faster than the noise they made. The Darka column ceased to exist. Not retreated, not scattered, ceased. The rounds punched through armor, through bodies, through the pods behind them, through the dirt beneath the pods. A line of destruction, 200 meters long and 10 meters wide, where nothing was alive anymore, and most things were no longer solid. Vreth, half a mile from the strike, watched through a cracked optical feed as the thing in the sky banked, turned, and came back for another pass. His translator could not identify the aircraft type. His tactical computer could not calculate its speed. His doctrine had no entry for a species that built a vehicle whose only purpose was to deliver that much death, that fast, to a single strip of ground. He tried to raise yield. The channel was static. Something was wrong with their communications. Not jammed, not blocked, but tangled. As if something was inside their encrypted frequencies, pulling them apart strand by strand, reading them, learning them, discarding them. 17 nations had declared joint military response within 4 minutes of the landing. Vreth did not know this yet. NATO had activated Article 5. China and Russia were sharing satellite data with the United States through channels that had not existed 6 minutes ago, and that had been built in the time it took a Darka soldier to reload a plasma cell. India had scrambled its air force. Australia had deployed its navy. Brazil, South Korea, Japan, Germany, France, the United Kingdom, all of them moving, all of them coordinating, all of them doing so with a speed and efficiency that would have been impossible yesterday, when they had been arguing about trade agreements and border disputes, and whose turn it was to host the Olympics. The Darka Doctrine had called them divided. They had been divided, right up until the moment something gave them a reason not to be. And then the division vanished so fast, it was as if it had never existed at all. As if the arguing and the politics and the petty human squabbles were just a family bickering at dinner, loud and messy and real, until someone kicked in the front door. Then the family became something else. Vreth found this out the hard way. He was falling back toward his pod when a human soldier came out of the wheat to his left. Small, soft, no armor worth mentioning, a helmet, a vest, a weapon that looked like a child's toy next to Vreth's plasma rifle. Vreth was faster, stronger, better armored. He struck the human across the chest with his lower right arm and felt ribs break under the impact. The human went down. The human got back up. Vreth hit him again. The human fell, rose, blood on his face, one arm hanging wrong, making a sound that the translator rendered as words, but that was really just noise, raw, unprocessed, animal sound. The human lunged, teeth, fingernails, a knife that appeared from somewhere and buried itself in the gap between Vreth's shoulder plates. It took 30 seconds to kill one human who was already broken, already bleeding, already beaten. The human fought for every one of those seconds as if each one was the most valuable thing he had ever owned. When it was over, Vreth stood in the wheat and looked at his hands. They were shaking. Not from effort. Vreth had killed before, many times. Training kills, simulation kills, kills against species that fought with logic and self-preservation. This was different. This human had not fought with logic. This human had fought with something that had no tactical value, no survival benefit, no rational basis. He had been dying from the first blow. He had known it. He had kept going anyway, not because he could win, but because stopping was not a thing his body knew how to do. Vreth's calm crackled. Yield's voice, thin, shaking. "Commander, I have accessed their current data networks." And? A pause that lasted long enough for another Darka transport to explode somewhere over the horizon. A dull orange bloom against the blue. "Leave," Yield said. "Now." The wheat bent again. More engines. Closer. The sky was filling with shapes that moved too fast to track, flying in patterns that interlocked with a precision that looked less like a military response and more like the synchronized movement of a single organism with 1,000 wings. Vreth looked up. The geometry was perfect. The retreat order came at minute 6, and it was already too late. Vreth transmitted it on every frequency the Darka used. Primary, secondary, emergency, and the old ceremonial channel that hadn't carried a real message in 40 years. He said the words that no Darka commander had ever said in the history of their species. Full withdrawal. All units, immediate. The words went nowhere. Human electronic warfare had found the Darka communication network somewhere around minute 4 and had taken it apart the way a child takes apart a toy. Not with care, not with respect, but with cheerful, curious, destructive efficiency. Darka encryption was built to resist the most advanced cyber warfare systems in 3 known galaxies. It used quantum-locked frequency rotation and self-modifying cipher architecture that had taken their best mathematicians 60 years to design. The humans broke it in 90 seconds, not because they were smarter, because they were faster. Because they had spent decades building machines whose only purpose was to break into things that didn't want to be broken into. And they had gotten very, very good at it. They didn't even need to understand the encryption. They just threw computing power at it the way they threw bullets, in quantities so absurd that elegance became irrelevant. Vreth couldn't reach his troops, couldn't reach his ships, couldn't reach Yield. He was standing behind a burning Darka transport in what had been a soybean field and was now a cratered waste of mud and metal, trying to find a way to tell 200,000 soldiers to run and the sky would not stop screaming. The jets came in waves. Not one nation, not two, 12, 15. Vreth lost count. American F-35s flew alongside Russian Su-57s, alongside European Typhoons, alongside aircraft from countries whose names Vreth had never learned, because the doctrine had said they were irrelevant. They flew in formations that should have been impossible for a species that had been shooting at each other a week ago. And they flew them perfectly, as if the hatred and distrust of 100 years of human politics had been folded up and put in a drawer the moment something from outside gave them a common direction to point their weapons. A Darka heavy cruiser, 800 meters long, the largest warship in the fleet, named Unbreakable Doctrine, in a moment of irony the universe was now enjoying immensely, was holding position at low orbit. It was providing covering fire for the ground troops, its plasma batteries turning patches of Kansas farmland into glass. The missile came from the ocean. A submarine, American, sitting in the Pacific, 2,000 miles away. It had launched a hypersonic missile that traveled at 10 times the speed of sound, which meant it covered the distance in minutes, which meant the Unbreakable Doctrine didn't detect it until it was already too late, because the ship's sensors were designed to track energy weapons, not a piece of metal moving faster than anything had a right to move inside an atmosphere. The missile hit the cruiser's midsection and kept going, through the outer hull, through the inner hull, through the reactor housing. The Unbreakable Doctrine broke apart like a clay pot dropped on stone. The two halves fell separately, trailing fire, and when they hit the ground, the explosion flattened everything for 2 miles in every direction. Darka, human, wheat, soybean, barn, and one unlucky water tower that had survived 3 tornadoes and a hailstorm the size of golf balls, but could not survive a warship falling on it. Dee watched it from 4 miles out. The shockwave knocked her hat off. "Huh," she said. She picked up her hat, put it back on, and went back to directing fire. Her unit had grown. Stragglers from other units had found them. She had 31 soldiers now, 2 working Humvees, and a radio that was receiving more traffic than she could process. Everyone wanted to know the same thing. Where are they? How do we kill them? What works? The answer to the last question was simple, and it was spreading across every military channel on the planet at the speed of light. Everything works. Everything kinetic. Bullets, shells, missiles, bombs, rocks. Anything you throw hard enough. Their armor was built for energy weapons, for plasma and lasers and directed radiation. Against a bullet, against a stupid, simple, ancient piece of metal moving really fast, they were wearing paper. Humans had been throwing things at each other since before they had language. It was their oldest technology. Their first weapon had been a rock, and they had spent the next 100,000 years making the rock faster, sharper, and more accurate, and they had never, ever stopped. The Darka had prepared for the weapons of the future. They were being killed by the oldest idea in human history, refined to a level of perfection that bordered on art. Dee's radio crackled. "Foxtrot 9, be advised. Darka ground elements moving through the town of Millbrook. Civilian population has not evacuated. Rules of engagement: protect civilians. Weapons free." Millbrook. Dee knew it. Small town, gas station, church, diner, school. Maybe 2,000 people. People who had probably seen the pods fall and done what people in Kansas do when the sky does something terrible. Gone to their basements, grabbed their guns, and gotten mad. She sent her units south, fast. The Darka who had wandered into Millbrook were not the elite troops. They were the confused ones, the ones who had been separated from their units when the communications went down. The ones who were doing what soldiers do when the plan falls apart, and nobody is answering the radio. Moving, searching, trying to find someone who knew what was happening. There were 9 of them. Plasma rifles, full armor, 4 arms each. They moved through the main street of Millbrook in a loose formation, scanning buildings, stepping over a knocked-over mailbox and a bicycle that someone had left in the road. They found the civilians at the intersection of Main and Oak. A woman, holding a child. The child was maybe 3, wrapped in a blanket, face buried in the woman's neck. The woman was standing in the middle of the street because she had been running for the church basement and hadn't made it, and now there were monsters between her and the door. Behind her, a man, tall, not in good shape, wearing a t-shirt with a logo on it that the Darka translation software couldn't read, and cargo shorts and sandals with socks. He was holding a baseball bat, a wooden bat, against 9 alien soldiers with plasma weapons and armor. The man was shaking, visibly, obviously, whole body shaking, the kind of shaking that happens when every cell in your body is screaming at you to run, and you are choosing, with whatever part of the brain makes these decisions, to not do that. His knuckles were white on the bat. His jaw was set, in a way that made the muscles stand out. He stepped in front of the woman and the child. The Darka stopped. 9 soldiers, 4 arms each, plasma rifles charged. They outweighed this man by 300 pounds individually. They could have gone through him the way the farmer's bullet had gone through Lieutenant Kale, in one side and out the other, without slowing down. The man raised the bat. Not high, not theatrically. Just up, across his body. A stance that said nothing except, "You will have to come through this." He didn't say anything. His mouth was pressed into a line that was beyond words, beyond bravery, beyond anything the Darka had a concept for. This was not courage in any way their doctrine understood it. Courage was a calculation, risk weighed against reward, fear measured against duty. This was something else. This was a mammal standing between its young and a predator. And the math didn't matter. The odds didn't matter. The size of the predator didn't matter, because the math and the odds and the size were all happening in a part of the brain that this man had simply turned off. A teenager across the street was filming on a phone. The red light blinked, steady, unafraid. The Darka unit stood in the road and looked at the man with the bat. They went around. Not tactically, not because he was a threat, not because they calculated a better route. They just walked around him, giving him a wide berth, the way you walk around something that you do not understand and do not want to touch. And they continued down Main Street, and the man stayed where he was, bat raised, shaking, alive. Vreth saw it through a salvage drone feed. Grainy, shaking. The image quality was terrible. It was the clearest thing he had ever seen. He understood, in that moment, with a certainty that went deeper than thought and settled into his chitin like a temperature change, that the Darka had not invaded a planet of soft, fragile, psychologically breakable creatures. They had invaded a planet of something else entirely. Something that shook and bled and broke and cried at sad stories and needed therapy and built monuments to individual dead and fought over what to call a sandwich. And none of that, none of it, not a single fragment of all that softness meant what the doctrine said it meant. The softness was not weakness. The softness was what they were like when nothing was threatening their children. Vreth opened the emergency channel. Static. He tried again. Static. He tried a third time, broadcasting in the clear, no encryption, just his voice thrown at the sky and hoping. All units, full retreat. Extraction now. This is Commander Vreth Sokol. Get off this planet. Get off it now. The message went out. Some heard it. Most didn't. It didn't matter. The humans were already finishing the job. The extraction pods launched in 1s and 2s, punching up through an atmosphere that had become a killing floor. Each pod that made it to orbit was a small miracle. The humans had sealed the sky so thoroughly that rising through it was like swimming upstream through a river of metal and fire. For every pod that reached the fleet, 2 were swatted down, by missiles, by cannon fire, by a species that had decided, collectively and without discussion, that nothing was leaving until they said so. Vreth made it to his pod. He didn't remember how. The last 6 minutes had collapsed into a blur of wheat and smoke and the sound of human weapons, which had no elegance and no beauty and no subtlety, and which killed with a bluntness that felt almost insulting, as if the humans could not be bothered to make death graceful. The pod sealed. The launch system fired. He was pressed into his seat by acceleration that made his vision narrow to a tunnel, and through that tunnel he watched the Kansas farmland drop away. The craters, the burning transports, the line of black smoke where the unbreakable doctrine had drawn its grave across the earth. He reached orbit in 40 seconds. The fleet was already moving, not retreating in formation, not executing a tactical withdrawal, running. 4,000 warships designed to conquer a galaxy were running from a planet that couldn't even get to its own moon consistently. And they were running at maximum thrust, with their weapons powered down and their shields forward, because every second they stayed in range of Earth was a second the humans might decide that the sky wasn't high enough and start reaching further. Vreth docked with the permanent wound. The corridors were chaos. Soldiers with missing limbs, officers shouting into dead communication systems. The smell of burned chitin and medical sealant, and something that Vreth recognized, after a moment, as fear. Real fear. Not the controlled, useful fear that the Darka trained into their warriors. The wild kind. The kind that prey animals feel. He found Yeel in her archive room. She was sitting on the floor. Around her, holographic displays showed data streams from Earth's internet. Current data, live data, the data she had never seen during the 20 years the fleet spent in faster-than-light transit. Her stained arms hung at her sides. Her clean arms were wrapped around her midsection, as if she were trying to hold herself together. "How many?" Vreth asked. "We deployed 200,000, Yeel said. Her voice was flat, emptied. "Preliminary count suggests fewer than 80,000 made extraction. 120,000 dead in 10 minutes. His ceremonial armor, the armor his family line had maintained for 4 generations, was cracked in 3 places, scorched black along the left side, and missing a plate over his lower right shoulder where a human bullet had found the gap and torn through the muscle beneath. He could feel the wound pulsing with his heartbeat. He did not care. "Show me what you found," he said. Yeel gestured. The displays shifted. She had pulled everything. Military databases, news archives, government records, scientific journals, social media, streaming video, all of it. The entire digital output of a species that documented its own existence with obsessive, almost pathological thoroughness. "Their weapons first," she said. "What the doctrine classified as primitive projectile technology is a category so broad it's meaningless. They have weapons that fire single bullets and weapons that fire 4,000 rounds per minute. They have weapons carried by individual soldiers and weapons carried by ships and aircraft and submarines. They have missiles that fly at 10 times the speed of sound. They have bombs that create vacuums that collapse the lungs of everything within a radius. They have weapons that use depleted uranium, a waste product from their nuclear energy program, as ammunition, because the material is so dense that it punches through armor like it isn't there." She paused. "They have nuclear weapons, thousands of them, enough to glass every continent on their own planet several times. The doctrine was correct that they are reluctant to use them. The doctrine was not correct about why. They are not reluctant because they are afraid. They are reluctant because they consider nuclear weapons unsportsmanlike." Vreth said nothing. "Their military coordination," Yeel continued. "The doctrine predicted that human tribal divisions would prevent organized resistance. In practice, 17 separate nations achieved full military coordination within 4 minutes. 4 minutes, Commander. Some of these nations have been actively hostile toward each other for centuries. It didn't matter. The moment an external threat appeared, Every internal conflict on the planet was suspended. Not resolved, not negotiated, suspended. Like a game put on pause. And every weapon they had was pointed in the same direction. She pulled up another display. Social media posts, millions of them, generated in the 10 minutes since the invasion began. "They're civilians," Yale said. The doctrine predicted mass panic, psychological collapse, surrender. Instead, she showed him video clips, photos, text posts, a woman in what appeared to be a bathrobe standing on her roof, firing a hunting rifle at a Darka transport. A group of teenagers throwing bottles filled with burning liquid at a Darka patrol. A man driving a pickup truck directly into a Darka formation at high speed, surviving the impact, climbing out of the wreckage, and continuing to fight with a tire iron. And the posts, the messages humans were sending each other while the invasion was happening. Not pleas for help, not prayers, not surrender. Jokes. They were making jokes, mocking the Darka, sharing tips on which caliber worked best against the armor, rating the invasion on a scale of 1 to 10 and giving it a 4, comparing it unfavorably to movies they had made about alien invasions, movies in which the aliens were smarter, better equipped, and more frightening. They had been rehearsing for this, not in military simulations, in stories, in games, in 1,000 fictional versions of exactly this scenario, played out in cinemas and living rooms, and on screens held in their soft, breakable hands. They had imagined aliens coming to conquer them so many times that when it finally happened, their first reaction was not terror. It was disappointment that the real thing wasn't as impressive as the fiction. Yale closed the displays. She sat in the silence for a long moment. Then she pulled up a blank document, the formal species assessment form, the one that would be transmitted to the Darka homeworld and archived in the Central Intelligence Database for all future reference. She wrote, "Humans are not a pre-spaceflight civilization. They are a pre-spaceflight civilization by choice. They have had the physics for generations. They do not expand because they are still deciding amongst themselves what kind of species they want to be. This is a species standing at the edge of something vast and arguing about the ethics of stepping forward. And the fact that they argue, that they care enough to argue, should terrify us more than their weapons. When they finish that argument, God help the galaxy. Do not return to this system. Do not contact this species. Do not let them know we exist beyond what they have already seen. Bury the invasion doctrine. Reclassify Earth as a closed system. Threat level, absolute." She transmitted it. Then she sat back down on the floor and stared at nothing with all 4 hands flat on the cold metal. And Vreth did not disturb her, because he understood that what she had lost today was not a battle or a fleet or 120,000 soldiers. She had lost a century of certainty. She had lost the thing she had built her entire life on. And there was no comfort he could offer that would fill a hole that shape. Vreth returned to his quarters. The permanent wound was accelerating away from Earth at maximum speed, and the blue planet was shrinking in the viewport. And he stood there, watching it get smaller, the way a man watches a fire he barely escaped. He thought about the farmer with the old rifle, who had killed 3 soldiers before breakfast. He thought about the human in the wheat field, who had kept fighting with a broken arm, and broken ribs and blood in his eyes, who had fought the way water fights a dam, without strategy, without hope, with nothing but the blind, dumb, beautiful insistence on not stopping. He thought about the man with the baseball bat. That was the one that stayed. That was the image that would follow Vreth into sleep for the rest of his life. A soft, trembling creature in cargo shorts and socks and sandals, holding a piece of wood, shaking so hard you could see it from orbit, standing between 9 armed soldiers and a woman holding a child. The doctrine had measured everything: speed, strength, armor, weapons, communication, population, resources, psychology. It had not measured that. It had not measured whatever you called the thing that made a man pick up a bat he knew wouldn't work against an enemy he knew he couldn't beat, and stand there anyway. Not because he was brave, not because he was stupid, but because the child was behind him, and moving was not something his bones would allow. Humans had a word for it. Vreth had seen it in the archived signals, used so often and so carelessly that Yiel had dismissed it as meaningless, a piece of verbal decoration that carried no tactical weight. The word was love. Yiel was right that it carried no tactical weight. She was wrong that it was meaningless. It was the most dangerous thing on that planet. More dangerous than the nuclear weapons, more dangerous than the jets, more dangerous than the hypersonic missiles and the depleted uranium, and the 100,000 years of refining the art of throwing things very hard at other things. It was the thing that made them fight when fighting made no sense. It was the thing that made a divided species unite in 4 minutes. It was the reason that a planet full of soft, slow, fragile creatures with no armor and no claws and no venom had climbed to the top of their food chain, and then, just for fun, started practicing for the day something from outside came to knock them off. The blue dot shrank. Vreth watched it until it was gone. Dee sat on the hood of a wrecked Humvee and watched the smoke clear. The all clear had come 8 minutes after the last Darka had been pulled off the ground. 8 minutes of silence after 10 minutes of the loudest thing she had ever heard. Her ears were still ringing. Her uniform was burned along the left sleeve. She had a cut on her forehead that she didn't remember getting, and a bruise on her hip from being thrown against a door by a shockwave. She checked her phone. Her wife had texted 40 minutes ago. DVR'd it. Mia scored a goal. You okay? Still streaked with smoke and the white contrails of jets, and the fading orange trails of things that had fallen and burned. The wheat field to her left was on fire. The water tower was gone. A piece of alien spacecraft the size of a house was embedded in the ground about half a mile north, still ticking and cooling. She typed back. Yeah, weird day, home by dinner. She put the phone in her pocket, leaned back on the hood, closed her eyes. The sun was warm, the same yellow medium-sized star that the Darka had noted in their database and filed under unremarkable. It sat in the blue Kansas sky the way it always had, steady and ordinary, heating the skin of a woman who was already thinking about what to make for dinner, and whether the dry cleaner was open tomorrow, and whether Mia's goal had been the left foot or the right, because Mia had been working on her left. Start to finish. Somewhere in Millbrook, a man put down a baseball bat and sat on the curb and cried. His wife sat beside him with the child, and did not let go of his hand, and the teenager across the street lowered the phone, and the red light went off, and Main Street was quiet again, except for the sound of a car alarm that wouldn't stop, and a dog barking somewhere in the distance. Not the same dog, a different one, but barking the same way. 2 barks, casual, unimpressed, and then silence. Over in Earl's yard, where it had all started, the rocking chair had stopped moving. The glass on the table was cracked, but still standing. The porch was scorched. The music from inside the house had stopped at some point, and nobody had started it again. Earl's dog came back up the path, brown and white, medium-sized. It walked past the craters and the wreckage and the scorch marks without interest, climbed the porch steps, circled twice, and lay down in its usual spot. It rested its chin on its paws. It waited.